You need some salt for good health. This next story is about an Australian family business that farms more than 60,000 tonnes of salt a year for use in everything from pools to animal supplements to high-end restaurants. For generations, one family has embraced a salty lifestyle, as Jemima Burt reports from Central Queensland.
It's a farming model that's been preserved for generations in the Olsen family. Using just seawater, sun, wind and time, they farm one of the most fundamental kitchen products, salt. At Port Alma in central Queensland, ocean water is pumped into ponds year-round and circulated through the 400-hectare site. Gradually, it becomes more saline.
We pump it into crystalliser ponds, and the salt, being heavy, starts to drop to the bottom. And in that process, about a year, we then run that excess water off and go in with a harvester that's a bit like a grain harvester and harvest about a foot of salt. And that settling process will take about another year.
It's a process which requires patience.
It's about a 2-year process from the time it comes out of the ocean until it goes into a wash. So as it gets harvested, it gets washed, spun dried and kiln dried, and then crushed, screened and bagged off and dispatched.
And unlike other farmers, they don't want rain.
A drought for us is when it's raining in growing salt, because you spend a year evaporating water out of your salt fields, and then when the rain comes, it's a real disappointment.
The family leased the site from the local Port Authority in 1983. They can use the land and pump seawater, paying a royalty on the salt that's produced. It took 5 years to build the salt works on the vacant mudflat, and it hasn't been all simple.
Machines can very quickly disappear if you don't use the right pontoons, because the mud, definitely just sucks anything away. So, and we haven't found the bottom here yet, so it's a long way down. It's a wonderful place, but it has got its challenges.
Including the corrosive nature of salt.
My father bought his first car quite a number of years ago as a Commodore, and all 4 doors of that car had fallen off in the first year. So from a brand new car to almost being dumped. So it is a challenge, but if you keep on top of it with regular maintenance and oils and good paints, you can keep it under control.
You can see the problem on most buildings, equipment and machinery.
And we have a maintenance crew that come in and they do maintenance between that 2 a.m. and 6 a.m. when we start our production.
There's a crew of 20 workers at the Port Alma site, many of whom have worked there for more than a decade. In 2004, the operation won a Salvation Army Employer of the Year award for hiring people with drug and alcohol problems, ex-prisoners and also the long-term unemployed. And they make up about half of the workforce.
It comes as a core thing of Olsen's, is supporting people, supporting the community. We've worked with people who've had disadvantaged backgrounds or just a difficulty. We give them an opportunity. It's up to them to stand on their own 2 feet, but we'll give them the opportunity.
Olsen's says it's Australia's oldest family-owned salt company. In 1888, Ollis Olsen, who'd emigrated from Sweden, started a grocery store in Parramatta. Later, ice delivery became a big part of the business. But the family realised it needed to adapt when modern refrigeration began.
Instead of it being ice blocks, they went into salt blocks. And that just led into the 1950 severe drought where there was many cattle needing supplementation. And so they were one of the first that in Australia that produced a salt block with other elements, depending on what the nutritional requirement for the animal was.
In 1957, the family purchased its first salt lease on the Yorke Peninsula of South Australia to develop the livestock business. Then leased another on the Eyre Peninsula, and finally the Port Alma site. Animal nutrition supplements remain a core part of the business. Salt from the Port Alma plant is sent to Brisbane, where it's mixed, pressed and sent to farmers across pastoral regions of Australia. Lick blocks are feeding supplements for cattle made from salt, molasses and various trace elements, depending on what's deficient. The Olsen's blocks range from 5 to 90% salt, and while rain at the saltworks is bad, the agricultural side of the business relies on farmers getting enough rain to grow feed.
Generally, it is a seasonal business because it relates totally to what's going on in the paddock. So we'll have somewhere between 30 and 60 employees, depending on how dry or what the seasons are doing.
The Coffey family, based at Miriam Vale in central Queensland, has used the supplements for more than a decade. Adam and Jacinta Coffey purchased their property Bareelam 4 years ago, but were faced with a toxic weed common across coastal and hinterland areas of Queensland and New South Wales.
Around here we've got a lot of lantana, which is pretty common in this coastal area. And in fact, when we first moved here, we had a few steers that were fairly badly affected by it, and it's not a very pretty thing to see.
He says one of the Olsen's supplements counteracts the poisoning.
So we use a bentonite product. Bentonite's the block that we use, which basically allows the animal to process those toxins and pass through the system rather than affecting them. So it's changed the way that we can potentially operate here in terms of bringing cattle in from outside areas, given that we trade a lot.
Most of the 40,000 tonnes of salt produced here at Port Alma annually goes towards the livestock supplements. Some is also sold as specialty pool salts, high in magnesium and potassium. Olsen's other block on South Australia's Eyre Peninsula also produces more than 20,000 tonnes per year and supplies its range of gourmet products, which have found a place on Melbourne's culinary scene.
Fresh out of the water, just beauty.
In Melbourne's bustling Hardware Lane, flavour is king. Ian Curley is a chef and co-owner of the French saloon bar and bistro. He's been curing Hiramasa kingfish for nearly 2 decades.
And I've been always using it for the same recipe, and it's always been the Olsen salt that I've been doing it with. I find it cures my fish quicker, and I get I believe I get a better, stronger taste with it, and it works for me. So it's a recipe that I never wanted to change.
He says the backstory of the unassuming kitchen staple is as important as the product itself.
If you were to ask 100 people where does salt come from, they go, oh, supermarket. But for me, it's kind of like, I've actually been to Whyalla and up in Queenstown where they make it, and held it in my hand and I think, how good a product is this? It's just beautiful. You imagine in every kitchen and every cafe in the world, there's salt. It's got to be the hardest thing next to air and water that you've got to sell, because it's salt.
Throughout human history, salt has been important for food, economics, culture and religion. For generations, the Olsen family has been farming salt, and there are no plans to stop.
We're excited about the future. We're continuing to grow and expand.